Well, crap is about to hit the fan in Ukraine. Russia just issued a warning to the United States. We have advanced weapons that you don't have, and we could destroy you. That was basically the message. If you don't back off right now with what your plans are, that's the message, because NATO may have just crossed the red line in Ukraine, and we're watching now to see the biggest, maybe the biggest Russian response, like what that response will look like. This is a big developing story in Ukraine at this hour, and it could be a push towards World War III. Specifically, NATO, led by the United States and Britain, just introducing depleted uranium tank shells into the fight, which, of course, Russia warned about weeks ago. And as recently as a few days ago, said this is a red line you cannot cross, and we will respond accordingly. So we will get to that in a second. I mean, the U.S. has actually been pretty quiet about this. The U.K. government has actually been pretty vocal about this. And we're going to show you the video where these depleted uranium shells are caught on camera in a big propaganda piece by the British government. Like, here's our training of these Ukrainians and their tanks. Oh, and here's some depleted uranium shells, which, when unleashed on a population, causes cancer for generations to come. Again, I dare you to Google the term depleted uranium Iraq and look at the awful photos of children from Iraq from using depleted uranium shells and the tumors and the awful stuff. So that's coming in Ukraine. But first, before we even get there, the UN Security Council just voted on Russia's resolution to create a UN commission to investigate the largest ecological terror attack in world history, the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline. Let's watch this vote. So here was the vote. Here is the vote. All right. How many of you in favor? How many of you in favor? Okay, we got 1, we got 2, and 3. Okay, you got China, Russia, and Brazil in favor. How many opposed to the investigation of the Nord Stream pipeline? How many of you are opposed? How many of you are opposed or abstain? How many of you and... Oh, all of you. All of you pieces of shit don't want an investigation.
No, thank you.
What world am I living in? So my son, he's 12. He's more intelligent than all those people in that room. He's right now in the middle of a like a model UN, like learning about the United Nations, right? And he was assigned a country, and so he's been doing research and stuff. Anyway, nevertheless, he was asking tonight what's in the show, and I was talking about the United Nations, and he's like, "Oh, what about?" And I explained how the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, but the United States says we didn't do it. In which case, you would then say, well, let's have an investigation. If we say we didn't do it, you should have an investigation. And my son said, yeah, Daddy, that makes no sense. That would be like me saying I didn't eat all the cookies and, saying, hey, well, we're going to look in your stomach to prove it. And no, I don't want you to look in my stomach. Well, why wouldn't you? Well, because if you didn't eat all the cookies, then we shouldn't look there.
That's a very invasive example, but we'll go with it.
That's all we could think of in the moment. We were just flying by the seat of our pants. It was me and my son just kind of spitballing ideas.
It was a pro-Ukrainian group. What else do they need to know?
Right. So no investigation. You don't need to do an investigation. We already told you. So can you believe that? All of these countries, like, nope, no investigation
That's
needed.
Insane.
And Russia wanted an international investigation. The United Nations would do the investigation. No, we don't. We vote against that.
That is infuriating.
Yes. Like, if you ever, sometimes I just walk around our studio in our office and I'm like, what is happening in this clown world?
Yeah.
Like, how do these people live with themselves at night? Daddy, what did you do today? Oh, I voted against investigating the largest ecological terror attack in world history. Good, Daddy. You want to go out and play some basketball?
Because I'm not very interested.
Because I'm a piece of shit.
I don't find that interesting.
All of those against say no. I mean, we all knew that the United States carried out the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline. You have to be an idiot to think otherwise. But they insist they didn't. Wouldn't it be an amazing opportunity for them to clear their name? Right? We had a UN investigation with all of these countries. Got us off the hook. Last week.
Let's see how long the no votes stay in the council.
Yeah.
Like next time they're gonna be like, oh, where are those people? Oh, we got rid of them.
Yeah, the three of them: Brazil, China, and Russia. Well, last week, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was was directly asked about the Nord Stream pipeline. Here was his response.
I want to implore you on that, move to a question. Last September, Nord Stream pipelines were blown up. You're now in a formal setting. Can you assure the world that no agency of the U.S. government blew up those pipelines or facilitated
Yes,
that?
yes, I can.
Thank you. Putin has told us he wants to restore the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Roger that. Next.
So,
Talk about box ticking.
oh my God. I mean, literally, kids, I would love for kids just come closer to your television. This is what it looks like when a grown man is lying right to your face. Lying right to your face. Let's watch it again.
Well,
I want to implore you on that, move to a question. Last September, Nord Stream pipelines were blown up. You're now in a formal setting. Can you assure the world that no agency of the U.S. government blew up those pipelines or facilitated
Yes,
that?
yes, I can.
Thank you.
well, and think about it. That plays to the narrative. They're saying it was a pro-Ukrainian group. He's on the record now saying it wasn't an actual, department of the military. So that leaves it to what? Volunteers that are over there that we've sent over there?
Right.
yeah.
They're
Who
pro-Ukrainian.
is it?
Well, that's what the New York Times said, that they were just state actors that were sort of renegade or freelancers. Like a freelance writer, you just get a freelance pipe blower upper.
Well, and also, he may be able to sort of step out of this and say, I don't know. I was not in those negotiations. So yeah, I can say that US wasn't involved because he wasn't brought into those meetings. Now, ask the same question of Ned Price. Ask the same question of the other people involved.
But
at the
that's not what the
CIA.
question was. The question was, can you say with certainty that the U.S. didn't do it? He's not saying, did you know anything about it? He's saying, do you know for sure that it wasn't the U.S.? And he says, yes, definitively, which then would require a response. Like, how do you know that? Because there's so much gray area right now. Can you tell us what allows you to say that with such declarative nature?
Well, he just moves right on, right? Because then he's on to the next question. He's like, good, I'm glad we got that out of the way. You're a good guy. All right, let's move on.
But he's not giving him a way of plausible deniability. Like, not, did you know? Did you have any evidence of this?
Yeah.
That
Did
would
you
be a
personally?
different.
That was my
Yeah.
That's my point with how he framed the question, because he specifically said it in a way that it limits the amount of people he's asking. It's like, this little branch of our military, it's these, you're sure it wasn't this small thing, but that's outside of the mercenaries we have, all the other stuff that
Yeah.
falls outside of that still we would consider military because they're paid from our budget.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just so disgusted with our government. I mean, it makes my skin crawl to think about these people and these people in power right now sitting in Washington, just totally ignoring questions posed to them in a congressional hearing,
Yeah.
lying right to our faces. Like, this is, so when I teach my children about government and like civil service and the United Nations, like, I'm looking at a bunch of scumbags. And these are the people that are in power. Like, why would my son want to learn about this organization, like, held up in such high regard when they're literally sitting there as a group of liars? It's really, really disgusting and disheartening. And to see what's happening with, nuclear attacks on nuclear power plants, and the UN does nothing. You've got a story on Libya here we're going to talk about, does nothing about, what's going on in Nicaragua. Awful, awful stuff. So anyway, just feeling like punched in the stomach with this stuff. Before we get to the depleted uranium, which is about to be unleashed on the civilians that live in Donetsk and the greater Donbass region, I like this comment here. Natalie pointed it out in our chat
From Shankar N says, Ukrainium plus depleted uranium equals depleted Ukrainium. That's a good play on words. It's an awful thing, though, because that is exactly what will happen, is the complete depletion of that land.
Awful. Yeah. So remember, guys, what's happening in Donetsk, what's happening in former Eastern Ukraine, now Russia, that this was Eastern Ukraine. Many ethnic Russians lived in this area since 2014. Ukraine, of course, has been bombing this region, carrying out a genocide. Last year, Russia had enough of the bombing and the killing of civilians, and they moved in. They called it a special military operation. The rest of the world, called it an invasion, and they were going to, take over Ukraine. But if you actually understood what was going on here, it was much more nuanced than that. But they didn't care. They took over. Russia came in, took over this area, and the people voted to become part of Russia in this section of Ukraine. It didn't have to be this way, but NATO wanted it this way. But some newly unearthed, stunning video from CNN has emerged. It's from about a decade ago. Yes, CNN had reporters in Donetsk covering the genocide. Did you know that? I didn't. And they were covering what Ukraine was doing to the people of the eastern part of that country, their own people, their own citizens. CNN does not want you to see this video, and that's why they've hidden it on their website. But thanks to the internet, we're going to show it to you now. This is CNN covering Donetsk, the Donbass, being attacked by Ukraine. Watch.
Petro Poroshenko will have a hard time winning back hearts and minds in this city. As the people of Donetsk sweep up the debris of their homes and livelihoods, they are hardened against a president they say is killing his own people. We are Ukrainian, but they kill us, this man says. So we probably need our own country. But people in Kiev, they are not brothers for us. The shells hit these homes days ago, but the tears are still fresh.
27-го, 28-го, 29-го очень сильно. Фактически мы живем под подвалом.
We live on the ground. It was so hard for 2 weeks, especially for 27, 28, 29th. But only today it's quiet.
Извините, я пойду.
Sorry, I need to go.
2 people were killed outside this block of flats last Wednesday. One of them was a 50-year-old woman, the other a 34-year-old woman. Her husband, who won't talk to us, he says he's in shock, managed to make it down to the cellar with their little child, but she just didn't have the time. And this is a story that repeats itself over and over in dozens of apartment blocks, with civilians being killed by the constant shelling around Donetsk.
CNN.
I guess they've forgotten that.
That's before the narrative shifted, and they were no longer allowed to tell the truth about what was going on there. Once, of course, the deep state got their claws in you and told you to start covering this story, that's how it unfolded. So CNN, of course, wasn't alone in their coverage of this genocide or the neo-Nazis or any of the stuff that was happening there. At the time, the press was warning that this was bad news. Most of the press. And that the U.S. was going to drag us into war in Ukraine. That was the message from Europe. Like, hey, watch what the U.S. is doing right now, meddling in Ukraine. They're going to drag us into war. Here's the front page of the Guardian newspaper. In Ukraine, the U.S. is dragging us towards war. Washington's role in Ukraine and its backing for the regime's neo-Nazis has huge implications for the rest of the world. May 13th, 2014. Oh. So this morning, the tanks arrived. The tanks have arrived, complete with training on how to use depleted uranium shells. We're waiting to find out if those shells have now arrived in Ukraine. I'm sure they were shipped as part of the bundle of these tanks. So what's going on here? Well, Ukrainian soldiers have been filmed alongside depleted uranium ammunition in Britain that Britain is supplying out of their own country for the fight against Russia. Now, the footage was included in a new documentary just released in the past 24 hours. The UK Ministry of Defense released this video of Ukrainian tank crews completing their training. Like, hey, they just graduated to go back to Ukraine and then be destroyed. They'll probably last 4 hours, right? That's what Ukraine has said, that a soldier's lifespan is now about 4 hours once it hits the battlefield. So these people that have had 3 months of training now, they won't live very long after this. Here's just a little taste of this new propaganda piece that the British Ministry of Defense just released. I watched this whole thing, so you don't have to. Here's just a sample of this tank training that you're paying for with tax dollars.
Yes, so obviously we are training the Ukrainian drivers. So it's a 3-week course for them themselves. Obviously, normal drivers take about a month, but obviously we're going through the process of how to guide the vehicle on the ground, But also we do maintenance. So like at the moment we're changing sprockets. That's due to wear and tear. But it's a good thing for them. So if that does happen, they've got a way to do it, knowledge of how to do it in the field. And then.
Yeah. So that's the tank. So we sped up their training. Normally it would take a month, but we've sped it up. We've sped up their training. So we just get them back in there as cannon fodder. So we'll show you that depleted uranium footage in a second. But here's an eagle-eyed observer caught the depleted uranium shells in the video. So this is a screen grab from the video. Here you can see them sitting on the table and some of those shells. So you can see that there. The U.S. denies supplying depleted uranium ammunition to Ukraine, and yet here are those shells. Here's a U.S. soldier in Britain teaching Ukrainian troops about these tank shells. So this is a U.S. soldier. They are doing the training, pointing them out and instructing them how to load them, how to be familiar with them, showing them the different ammunition types. These depleted uranium rounds that are being supplied to Ukraine. This was captured on camera as part of that same British documentary. Watch.
And one track will be slightly looser. One track will be a lot tighter.
So there you can see the shells on the table. As he was explaining how these things load, how they explode.
The only other thing I would say, only because they were
Americans.
Yeah, I was going to say that's an American accent.
Yeah, so Americans explaining how these different shells work.
Okay, so as you can see then, it's yellow, which denotes it's got high explosive content inside it. Yeah, so inside the round there is high explosive content.
Yeah. So these are the rounds being shipped with the tanks. Well, most likely, right? So we still need confirmation that they've now arrived in Ukraine, but the tanks are showing up and they've already told us they're going to. According to Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Annabel Goldy, last week, Britain will be sending depleted uranium shells to Ukraine with these tanks. That's right from the ministry's mouth, as we reported last week. These are armor-piercing weapons that cause cancer. And if you need it and it gets into the soil, and the fragments from the dust of this will ruin people's lives, and of course, this area for decades, generations to come. So, hey, if we can't have this area back, this eastern Ukraine back, that's now part of Russia, we'll just deplete the area, make it a no man's land, and kill all the people there. If you needed any more evidence that the West wants the total destruction of the Donbass, then look no further. Putin responded to the UK defense minister announcing these new shell deliveries. Watch this again.
Что Великобритания устами заместителя главы Министерства обороны этой страны объявила не только о поставках танков на Украину, но и снарядов с объединенным ураном. Похоже, что Запад действительно решил воевать с Россией до последнего украинца уже не на словах, а на деле. Но хотел бы в этой связи отметить, что если все это будет происходить, то соответствующим образом Россия вынуждена будет реагировать, имея в виду, что коллективный Запад начинает применять уже оружие с ядерным компонентом.
So Russia said yesterday that we have advanced weapons that you don't have that could destroy you. And if you don't back off right now. So here we are, like on the precipice. And this comes on a day when Germany also rolled in their tanks. So all the tanks are now arriving just in time for whatever shit is about to hit the fan inside of Ukraine. On Monday, Der Spiegel reported that 18 Leopard 2 battle tanks have been received by the Ukrainian government after the tanks were successfully delivered across the Ukrainian border. And the UK sending their tanks, the United States still working on getting their tanks delivered, and all of these additional armored vehicles now showing up. So, peace talks? So, UK sending tanks with depleted uranium. German tanks just arrived. So, get ready, folks. There's your on the precipice of World War III.
If you want to get a clear example, or like this is a clear example of NATO's real like intentions towards Ukraine of having them fight to the last person, because they wait until like their army is already completely decimated, and then they're like, okay, here's some tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they didn't get to that right in the beginning. They're like, because they don't really care.
No, and now we're sending in jets.
Yeah.
So jets and tanks and depleted uranium. You know, like
yeah, but I'm gonna still argue that how do we don't even know that their military is depleted like they keep telling us. And it's like, are they just using that as an excuse to keep sending more weapons and money because of it's like a money laundering scheme? Because like we've not seen any proof of the numbers at all.
Well, the Senate today announcing that they putting together an auditing like body that's going to actually finally start like looking into things.
Oh, I believe that.
So
100%.
We'll get to the bottom of this. Like, well, you know, like there was the Taliban in the past like 24 hours released videos in Afghanistan, had like all these weapons, like they're parading around with U.S. weapons. Like U.S. weapons are flowing everywhere.
Yes.
Not to the, you know, and those who needed it in Ukraine, I guess. I mean, those people are gone. You know, those people
that's
have been
like
destroyed.
That's the recipe for any successful business, isn't it? Like you start your business and then like a year or two later, you get an accountant.
Yeah.
Right.
Just so that you know they can come in and find out what you've been up to. You know, like
2 years later.
It works. You get that. Yeah, 2 years later.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.